setup blocks are generally used in the initialize section of the master program block, but they can also be placed in the program section. For example, if a user wants to set a sensor timeout of 10 seconds initially, but anticipates a longer action later in the program, an additional sensor timeout block can be inserted at that point and configured for a longer duration, such as 20 seconds. Note that blocks in the initialize section of the master program block only run before the first cycle. If there are initialization actions that need to run in every cycle, those blocks must be placed in the program section. Finally, some setup blocks are specific to the controller being used, whether easy pneumatics or easy motor. When the system is waiting for sensor feedback, such as from a pneumatic actuator's position sensor, a timeout condition will occur if the feedback is not received. Once the timeout is reached, an error message will be displayed and the program will terminate. The default timeout is set to 10 seconds, but users can modify this by configuring the sensor timeout setup block to a different value. The wait for user timeout setup block functions similarly to the sensor timeout setup block. The default timeout is also 10 seconds, but users can adjust this by configuring the setup block to a different value. If no timeout setup block is included in the program, the default timeout values of 10 seconds will be applied for both the sensor timeout and the wait for user timeout. The setup linear slide block is used to configure motors attached to lead screw or ball screw slides. Easy Motor supports up to 4 motors labeled A through D. To simplify identification, users can assign each motor an alias using the Name Here field. Once an alias is defined, it will appear in the motor blocks throughout the program. The slide length, pitch, and units are also configured in the setup linear slide block, based on the manufacturer's specifications. This information is used to calculate the maximum number of steps a motor can move to reach the end of the slide. If a move command exceeds this calculated limit, the system will display an error. Once these values are defined, the system prevents the slide from moving beyond the specified travel length. Finally, in the same setup linear slide block, define the motor's steps per revolution and whether the motor has an encoder. In the steps per revolution field, enter only the motor steps as specified by the manufacturer. Do not include any microsteps. The motor drive in this control box will automatically resolve these steps into microsteps, but this process is transparent to the user. Note that setup linear slide blocks assume a home switch is being used, and linear slide move blocks will not execute unless the associated home switches are connected to the control box. To specify whether the motor includes an encoder, simply check or uncheck the encoder box. The home motor block can be used to home both linear slides and standalone motors. For linear slides, this block moves the slide until it contacts the home switch, setting that position as home. Note that the system assumes a right-handed thread for slide screws. Left-handed threads will produce unpredictable results and are not currently supported. For standalone motors, the home position is set to the motor shaft's current rotational position when the home motor block is executed. The home motor block can be included in multiple locations throughout the program, allowing you to update the home position of selected motors as needed. The setup rotary axis block is used to configure standalone motors without linear slides. Similar to the setup linear slide block, users can define an alias, set the steps per revolution, and include whether the motor has an encoder. Since standalone motors do not require a home switch, users can check or uncheck the home switch installed box to specify whether one is being used. Additionally, if the motor's rotation is geared, the gear ratio can be defined in this block.